Okay, so thanks for joining us. We have our next panel with Glenn Adamo and Craig Barry and Harold Bryant. We're going to spend about 30 minutes just talking about the state of production. There are a couple of videos to roll, so let's start with, hey Karen, can we cue up the E-League one? We'll kind of jump into something a little unique.
Curveball.
It's going to be the most exciting thing of my life.
To compete,
it's part of who I am.
This is the building of something. The beginning of something. This is the dream realized.
This is definitely a dream come true.
A whole new level.
still another 8 seconds left for him, pushing around, he gets a shot. Oh, Christie, what a play!
That is absurd. Step into this new arena. A fresh venue for a gathering of the next.
Pressure's on here for Navi.
The next step in the pixelated evolution.
One of the most exciting games to watch.
That meshes gripping action
An incredible comeback.
with cyber athletics.
Give the headshot. You cannot be serious. What is this?
Growing and global.
I'm from France, Australia,
Denmark.
Brazil, Slovakia.
I'm from Sweden.
These competitors are the best in the world. Many nations connected through the language of competition.
Luminosity taking it in overtime.
This is a confluence of nerve and reflex, strategy and skill, respected by foes,
Guardian is the gatekeeper of my Stefan team tonight.
The most versatile player in the world.
celebrated by fans. Top teams eyeing the spoils of victory. It's go time in prime time.
E-League is bringing this competition to the next level.
Tonight on TBS, a new league seizes the spotlight in its own arena.
We've never played in an arena like that.
A new challenge for the next wave.
This is the start of something.
Welcome to E-League on TBS.
All right, so that's a nice kickoff. Good morning, everybody. I'm Glenn Adamo, and I'm joined here by Craig Barry, who's EVP at Turner for production, and he's Chief Content Officer. Also, Harold Bryant, who's Executive Producer and Senior Vice President of Production at CBS Sports. And, you know, storytelling is our life. That's kind of how we make our living. The tools are changing, as we just saw, and it continues to change. So what I'd like to do is make this kind of a little more interactive and less for me and hear from the panelists. So why don't we talk about pretty much, we'll get to E-League, or we can start with it if you'd like, but talk about collaboration, especially these days where many years ago when I was at NBC, you couldn't do anything with anybody else but your own network. But now today it's so dramatically different.
This feels like a normal day at the office for us.
Yeah, absolutely. This is what we do on a regular basis now. You know, the NCAA tournament, the PGA Championship. It's, you know, to succeed, I think, in this business nowadays, we have to collaborate with other media companies.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely have learned. At first, we were unsure how the partnership would unfold, but over the last 5 years, we've definitely learned about each other's strengths and weaknesses and how to leverage those. And now I would say that the product's overall, you know, it's better approach. It's a better product for the consumer, for the fan, because of our partnership, because of us leveraging our strengths, our technologies, our capabilities, our assets. And then, like, being extremely smart and communicating about what we think is going to work best in the approach and being non-territorial about it.
And the bottom line is telling a good story, and we come to the table, we come to the event with that in mind, is to serve the viewer, to enhance their experience and tell a good story, and find the right you know, resources to do that.
Yeah, so philosophically, I think for Turner, and I think for CBS too, at the core, storytelling is the most important thing we do. And so it's facilitated by access. So I always kind of say to our team and our group, access, access, access. How close can we get the fan, the consumer, to the action, to the court, to the player? How can we create that emotional connection between the fan and the player, between the fan and the team, the game, the story? And it's funny, as I sit in here and we talk so much about technology, a lot of times, one of the first questions we're asked when we go into an event is, what's new for 2016, or what's new for the tournament, or 2017? And my answer is, I think, what we try to accomplish is not necessarily what is the best and brightest technology, but what is ultimately going to facilitate this kind of emotional connection. So for me, and I can speak for Turner, and I'll let Harold speak for himself, let's say we start the NBA season, and we have an opportunity to use a 360 cam. If the 360 cam doesn't facilitate a better storyline, then I'd rather just put 2 more steady cams on the court, or I'd rather mic 4 more players, or I'd rather go into the locker rooms. So it's really important to understand that just because the technology is there, it doesn't necessarily facilitate a better ability to tell a story. I'd also say, I'm going to jump around a little here, is that I'm a relative content purist, and so as this space has evolved and we talk more about engagement, I used to, sorry to be cliche, I used to say content is king at its core, but what I'm finding is that platforms are really important. Like, not all platforms are created equal. Not all audiences are created equal. People are consuming their content in different ways. Therefore, you have to be telling the story to different audiences in different ways, and you have to be leveraging those platforms. And that's why E-League is so important, which it's a native digital audience, but yet we have it on broadcast, and so we're using that as a portal for a casual fan or a curious fan. We're not trying to get the hardcore fan over from a native digital platform. We're trying to open the door for a new casual fan and tell the story there, so they become more interested.
From our perspective, all of the platforms are great, but you cannot forget about the core. I think, we preach to our producers and our directors and our talent that you have to tell that story that's on the field, that's on the court, that's in the arena, and then use the other platforms as shoulder programming to enhance that experience. But you can't forget the core. We have a very sophisticated sports audience. They're very smart, and they will call you out if you're not, as Ken pointed out on the last panel, with the right replay of that high-speed arm being hit there, or if your announcers are not focused on, the proper name or the history that, Peyton Manning has gone through in his neck surgery. If you don't know that stuff, if you don't know the core, you will be exposed. And so that we preach that to our guys, and then we use these other platforms and virtual and specialty channels to enhance the experience.
Let me, if I can, just ask you both to comment. For people who aren't doing what you're doing together every day, the question for me is 2 questions. One is, how do you split it up so that you're really both telling the story and you're both sharing the story? You talk about communication. And then how do you kind of parse out, okay, we have all these platforms to solve. CBS may do it a little bit differently than we do it, and we do it a little bit differently than CBS. How do you approach an event? You take the PGA Tour or something. How do you approach that to be able to not only be able to tell stories on days where the other guy's not on, but also on different platforms? How you parse them out? So there has to be some plan. I'm sure it's not willy-nilly.
No, I don't actually think split is the right terminology.
Definitely not.
I think we actually throw the collective into the pot, and then we sit around and say, okay, well, who's the best talent to do this part of the show or to tell this story? And what's the technology, and what's the best production team to ultimately do the Final Four, or do the championship game, and who should do the studio? And I think it's evident to us, and I think to the primary group that makes the decisions, that after 5 years, who is good at what, and I'm talking about from an operation or execution standpoint, or a broadcast approach, who is good at what in our kind of pool of capabilities and assets. It's not that difficult a decision to understand that Jim Nance is going to do the Final Four, and we're not going to try to put, a Turner talent in there, and at least not now. So, and I think the same goes to the production teams. They have, as it comes to the game itself. They have this kind of wealth of it. CBS has this wealth of experience around producing the championship game in the Final Four. It would be silly for us to kind of move off that model just to try to reinvent something just for reinvention itself. Whereas from the studio show, we've been pretty innovative in the space, and we definitely learn from each other. But for us, it makes more sense that okay, maybe Turner, takes the lead on that. But it's completely collaborative.
Yeah, more collaborative than I would think too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The same thing at the PGA Championship. We want to do enhanced channels. Well, the Turner guys have been very proactive in doing some of the different digital technologies. So we rely on them to do a featured group or something that's, that really supports the main broadcast. But, we've got guys that have been covering golf for decades, and you don't want to, again, get rid of that core. You want to make sure that that's, covered. So they're still in the chair.
Let's talk a little bit about new technology, whether it be virtual, augmented. I mean, everybody, 4K, 8K, it keeps on moving. It's a moving target. If we can, talk to how you both collaboratively decide to make, to your point, Craig, to make that check. Do I try this? And if it's not going to add, how do you guys go about that?
I think we both decided at the beginning we're not really into gimmicks, and so we really kind of think about when a technology comes on the table, we really vet it. We vet it between ourselves, and then we bring Tom and Ken into the room and everybody else into the room and kind of say, what do you guys think about this? I'll give you a good example. The rail cam that we used for the championship, Final Four in the championship game was something that we kind of came up with a few years ago. And that, we pushed really hard for through the NCAA because it can be cumbersome on the side of the court. But when we look at that, we looked at an opportunity for a camera angle that was going to deliver a new opportunity to tell a different story from different types of replays, whether that's tempo of the game or whether that's just a different way to kind of view the game. And what a lot of people don't realize is after the game, the camera angles live on. They live on for years and years and years, whether it's in promotional material or marketing material or documentary form. And so these shots and these camera angles become super, super important. And that turned out to be a really important camera. We captured a lot of shots. It gave this kind of new range of motion, and we were able to, and as important as it was in the game, it became a more important tool after the game when we were using it in post-production for documentary content, as well as feature content and then promotional marketing as well.
But the initial question was about how do we use this technology?
How do you decide on it?
I mean, how do we decide on it? We test it. We take it out there. We hear about it. We brainstorm ideas. We go to our guys out there and say, hey, we want to be able to zoom in on a foot on the sideline and not lose any resolution. And they go, oh, okay, well, let me try. We'll come up with something. Okay, there's 4K. There's the Dreamcatcher. That's how we do it. We just literally are brainstorming, throwing stuff, crazy ideas out there, and we ask you guys to say, what's the solution? What's out there? Can we do it? We want to do a 360. We've been talking about it for years. Flying around players, seeing all angles. We want to track players virtually on the field and see how those they're moving up and down and how fast they're going. And we throw it out there and discuss it and try to figure out ways to make it, implement it.
Got it. Any questions from out here? Things that are tickling you? No?
Come on, Herbie, I know you got a question. I see you sitting
Bill has wanted to raise his hand.
Yeah, he's
shy today. If you can, talk about some of the new technology like VR. How much have you played with it? What are you guys' initial thoughts? You don't say it's all the initial thoughts, some of them.
So on our front, I'll tell you the way we've approached it is, we heard about this on the last panel, is a little bit more about storytelling. We've taken it more, we worked with it more in the tape world and trying to tell an access story, as Craig was talking about, is engaging that fan, wanting to, hook them And so we're on surfboards, we're jumping out of planes, we're crawling through the mud, we're on top of bulls and riders, and we're in the sand traps with golfers, and we're trying to tell the story to through these really feature pieces that we're producing and putting out there, and then saying, oh wow, you want to see more of this event, come to the main broadcast, but you know this guy, or you know this the course that they're about to undertake. So that's our approach right now to VR. We have not engaged as much on the live aspect of that.
I'd say I see it a little differently. So I think the low-hanging fruit is that you can watch a game courtside or from the 50-yard line. You can strap a headset on, and whether it's a free model or a pay-per-view model, there's an opportunity there probably for incremental at some point. However, the bigger picture, it's not coincidence that the biggest social company in the world bought the biggest VR company in the world. I think that end game for VR is that I'll be in New York or Harold will be in New York and I'll be in California, and we'll strap on these headsets and I will be sitting right here with him watching a game. I think that you'll see, to come off sports, I think you'll see the first iteration of kind of social VR as you think of Match.com with VR or Tinder with VR, where literally you don't even have to show up to meet the person because you can just strap on this headset and you can be next to them. So I think ultimately there's a social application for VR that hasn't been realized yet. And it's going to be incremental from, first you'll strap it on and you'll be there by yourself, then you'll strap it on and there'll be an avatar of the guy next to you, and then there'll be a hologram, and then eventually it will be a photorealistic image, and obviously by that time you'll be wearing like what's the equivalent of sunglasses and not these massive units.
You guys talked about in the last panel that the technology isn't there yet with the glasses, but I still think it needs to be produced. I still think it needs to be, you need to guide that viewer and that fan. It's even live, and Davies, we're talking about it in the last panel as well, that, it's at 2.0. You can't just stick the camera out there. And again, this is what's great about our working relationship. We don't always agree on everything, but we see each other's opinion and adapt. And that's what our business, that's what we do, is adapt. But I still think VR live has to get to a better, a higher production level before it really has a chance to take off. There needs to be producers in the chair. There need to be, and I don't think we know how to do that yet. I think we're still getting there.
Yeah, I would agree to disagree. That's not.
All right. We'll agree to disagree.
That's not organic. That's the whole thing with VR is that it's the first-person perspective. Could you?
Well, that's kind of holographic.
Could you jump from seat to seat in real life? Like, okay, I'm watching courtside, but then I'm going to cut the camera, and now I'm watching in the end zone, and now I'm going to cut the camera. Granted, the code hasn't been cracked, and we can sit here and have this debate, which would be awesome. But, I think that there's still this kind of, when it comes to VR, it's this perspective of actually being there. And if you're there, I'm not sure how a produced feed is going to enhance the ability to make it more realistic than it already is from sitting in a singular chair.
Well, if you're in a singular chair, though, you want to see the other. You want to see.
But that should be my option, not yours.
You want to see the replays.
I should push the button, and it takes me to the other chair.
I think some viewers are lazy. They want people to produce it for them. They are.
It's funny you say that because I'm one of the groups I'm working with is Next VR. So to be totally transparent, the reality is when I was at the NFL last year and we did tests with Next and Jaunt as an example, two different, one cinematic, one quote-unquote live, except at the time, Next was not really thinking about the live, other than a live signal, they weren't really thinking about how it translated. They've spent a lot of time, and they added Danny Keynes from Twitter to kind of help them think this through. And there's been a sea change of storytelling and how they can get better. Clearly, that's, VR's not there yet, and it's probably a couple of years away, at least. But the difference is, I see that there's a cinematic version of this, which is, I used to call it the NFL Films approach, which is go out and shoot those things and go in the locker room and get experiences you can't get. And then there's the other side, which is how do you tell the story? The problem that we battle against, I think, is that the pictures are so good on regular broadcast, and now those pictures are translating to all platforms. So what's going to differentiate? And I think to your point, the experience, how it's a different experience is going to differentiate it, but it still has a ways to go.
Yeah, I'm not saying one's right or wrong. I'm just saying in this business, overnight something can happen and technology can change and the code can be cracked. So I'm open to anything. I just, like I said, we work, in building communities and serving those communities. And when I say that, I mean telling stories, engaging those communities. I think that the metric, don't get me wrong, I understand the business of ratings and CPMs and GRPs, but I think that the metric of engagement is probably our most important metric in this industry going forward. Are they watching? Are they sharing? Are they following? And so when we talk about engagement, we have to talk about extended platforms. It becomes such an important part of our business, not only at the storytelling level, but at this higher degree of engagement and connectivity, and then understanding what audience you're reaching, on what platform. The millennials or younger, they don't spend a lot of time on TV, so it's absolutely imperative that we're reaching them through and telling stories and connecting with them on different platforms. And different platforms allow us to connect with them in different ways, and a higher level of engagement. So, at least from my perspective, it becomes as important as the core is. I would say that creating this engagement and connecting to a broader audience via broader platform extensions is equally important.
How do you guys how do you think through, with all that's been written about cord cutting and things consolidating and stuff, how has it, if it has, how has it affected you in terms of both of your thoughts and reaching audience? And now I guess it's really all the different platforms that you have to program to.
Well, they're not disappearing. They're just going.
They're just changing.
They're just going somewhere else. So they're still out there to engage. Well, the one thing I would say, and this is kind of like in my own demented mind, is that the one thing that always, when we talk about cord cutters, cord nevers, it's my opinion that they always come full circle. So when you're, at 40, you're coming back to television, or 35, or whatever that age is. I don't know if this is a documented stat or there's research behind it, but, my thought process is, I get it, when you're in high school and college and early on you're consuming content on whatever platform you have available or whatever you prefer or whatever fits your lifestyle. But then ultimately when you come back, and whether it's because you have a family or career, and all of a sudden you're mounting TVs again, and you're more in that lean back mentality. So I think that, I don't think that you're going to see this dramatic drop off. I think, there's going to be erosion when it comes to, that kind of the core cable audience, but you'll just have to reach them in other places. And then I think the erosion will probably plateau, is because I do believe, and this is probably just my own opinion, that everybody kind of comes back around to that lean back experience that we all are used to. Especially when it, and still, that's still the most social experience, right? With the 70-inch TV and everybody in the room watching the Super Bowl or the Final Four, and you can't discount how important that is, especially in sports. That kind of connection that people have with each other while they're consuming the content.
Well, I think, I think the audience is still out there, and we have to figure out how to capture that audience, how to really find out how they're. We know how they're watching on all these other platforms, and we just have to aggregate that into our number. I think we think about these big events now in different ways. We think about them from, the day you show up at the Super Bowl, weeks before the Super Bowl, you start engaging them. You provide them content and leading up to the big game. And I think that's how we're approaching this. I think that's how our business is evolving. And all of these different platforms at Augusta, you engage somebody on Sunday and Monday on, our On the Range shows that lead up to our feature group shows that eventually lead to the broadcast and that leads to Sunday. You have to think about it from start to finish, not just game day. And that's what we're trying to tell our, all of our producers and our operations folks and our management group, that it's not just that 1 3-hour game. You've got to engage them from start to finish, and that start can be, a couple weeks in advance.
Great. That's pretty succinct. That was good.
Yeah, no, I think fundamentally the business is changing. Sports has a little bit of a past, but I think that brands, especially network brands, matter less. I don't think people care about very funny or we know drama. They just want their shows, right? So I would say real brands are things like, when we talk about networks, like Food Network, that's 24 hours of the same content, 24/7, 365. ESPN is a sports brand. Velocity is a car brand. And I think that, when we're talking about the consumption of sports, I think people kind of have a tendency, depending on who they are and how they consume sports, to say, oh, well, I get my NBA from Facebook, or I get, my NFL from NFL.com. They don't really differentiate. They're like, oh, I have to watch the NFL on CBS, or I have to watch the NBA on TNT. The fact that we have live sports, obviously, creates a by appointment by design. But I think that when we talk about this extension programming and this alternative content, I think people just are creatures of habit, and we've given them so much choice and so many platforms. We got to make sure we're there for them when they're ready to consume the content.
Anybody? Any questions? Bill?
So what I can tell you is that when we got into the space about 18 months ago, and like many of you in this room, you probably saw these gargantuan numbers, like this global audience, global revenue, and then when you actually get into the space, you realize that it's relatively small. It's the Wild West. It's a lot of concentrated money in concentrated spaces. I'm not, it wouldn't be a stretch to say that the publishers or the IP holders make the majority of the money. But it's about building communities and building platforms, and thus you are essentially building a community and serving as a community of millennials. So, and they have this incredible engagement levels, which obviously sponsors like. There's a real built-in audience. The audience continues to grow. There's multiple games that are esports proper games. So there's a couple first-person shooters. There's a couple MOBAs, which are top-down type games. There's 5 or 6 real professional esports games. And so ultimately, I think that you have to look at it from, we want to be authentic to the community first and foremost, and I think that we want to grow a brand in the esports community that people believe in. That that we when we got into it, we said And I'll give you an example specifically. We said, okay, we are going to take what we know from traditional stick and ball sports from an approach standpoint, and we're going to apply it to esports, because the differentiator for us was our ability to produce a higher quality product and to tell a richer narrative. Those were literally, in the boardroom, the two main differentiators that led us to the fact that we said we can be more successful in this space than the next person. Probably won't sustain, but for now. And so we were able to do that. We were able to leverage our infrastructure, build state-of-the-art studio, and then literally build this community of millennials that we can deliver content to, and that we can start to leverage to a real business model for our advertisers and potentially other platforms, while creating great content and great storylines along the way. So it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. I know what you guys have seen out there in these sellouts of Staples Center and the announcement recently on Barclays, and there's still a lot of codes to be cracked. There's still a lot of work to be done to figure out a really sustainable media model. It's very much the Wild West. But I feel like that, we've stood up in only 10 months. We've stood up, a substantial brand in the space. We are, I guess by the nature of it, we are, I humbly say, we're innovators in the space, even though we've only been in it for 10 months. We were awarded the major, which is when, much like, I hate to compare it to this, but like Wimbledon or US Open or kind of the Grand Slams, the publishers have these as well, and they award them to certain production entities. And so Valve, who produces Counter-Strike, awarded this to us after only our first tournament. So we're moving in the right direction. There's still tons of work to do. There's still a lot to understand about the space. Right now, it's just a land grab. Everybody's out there, whether it's the teams, the players, and when I say players, professional teams, professional players, production companies, whether it's Turner or ESPN, NBC, out there kind of trying to figure out the best business model for esports. And right now, it's just a big experiment.
Excellent. Great. Want to say something real quick, Harold?
Not about esports.
Okay. So we got to wrap up, unfortunately, but thanks, guys, for your time.
All right. Thanks.